because I just want to give a little bit of background to this particular development, which is it gives. I think it flatters me a little bit to put me down as the principal investigator on this, but just because of the constraints of our system, I was down as the investigator, but I am by no means the expert. But fortunately, I've invited the expert to be here, so that covers me. But I want to give a little bit of context as to why we have done this. I think that one of the challenges that we have faced at Lingnan University is to differentiate ourselves in terms of our what we might call liberal studies or general education, which is really realized in what we call the core curriculum. How do we differentiate ourselves from our fellow UGC institutions, particularly as the four-year curriculum gave them all opportunities to be able to introduce what would be called general education courses in their curriculum. That then left us with a challenge. How are we any different from, even Hong Kong Polytechnic University, for example, which also has general education? So how can we say that we are different? What happened is, fortuitously, I guess, a young man came to me who was sort of just embarking on his PhD, which he's now doing at Hong Kong U, and introduced me to something which I thought was a development on our existing approach to what we call the core curriculum. And this was an approach which, rather than focus on, let's say, content, contrasting content from the disciplines, it focused on concepts and how concepts are perceived from various different disciplines. And that seemed to me a far deeper approach to this liberal studies core curriculum idea than just looking at people's interest areas and saying, well, this is something different, you take this, and this is something different, you can take that. But really the integration of the idea, of the concept, is not done. It's really just a contrasting experience rather than a conceptual experience. So what we have here is an innovative approach. Interestingly, and I'm sure Andy might be interested in this, that philosophy, just before we actually came into this particular forum here, the last meeting I had with the core curriculum group, which is their program, philosophy introduced something which was rather along these lines, which was a nice little sort of development for us, Florian and I, because it really is at least a movement in the direction of looking at a concept from various different perspectives. And the concept that philosophy introduced was beauty. Anyway, I want to sort of end it there so you get the picture. This is why we are saying this is a deeper approach to the core curriculum, general education, liberal studies, than just looking at, let's say, something which contrasts with the discipline experience of the students. So I'm going to hand over now to Florian, who is the expert in this, and he will explain not only what it's all about, but how it can be done. Because it's challenging. I can tell you it's challenging for faculty, but at least we've developed an approach which may be able to be used by faculty if they're so interested. And this is really something he's going to do now, but I'm sure we can invite him back at some other point where interested faculty may be able to take it up and he can show with a little bit more detail how it can be done. So over to you, Florian.
Very well. So I've been experimenting recently with I'm not allowed to walk away, I see. I've been experimenting recently with no PowerPoints. When I feel I don't really need it, I don't want to do it, and see if it still works, so tell me if it works. Instead, I've given you all a paper. Most of you should have it. I'll tell you what I want you to look at some point. I have followed quite literally the questions that were posed to me in the email I thought it was a good way to structure the presentation. So first, what prompted us to apply for this TDG? Well, Jim actually quite sufficiently explained this already from your perspective. From my perspective, it was, let's experiment, let's have a thought experiment. What would be the ultimate interdisciplinary course? And then no restrictions or limitations. Because someone like Jim, of course, will immediately think of funding, how do we get people to do it? And I didn't think about any of this. It was just this idea of interdisciplinary education. How do you come as close as you can? That's how it started. Now, I came up with a model for course design, and I called it conceptual interdisciplinary course design. It is partly based on interdisciplinary research models and on concept-based course design theory by, among other people, Lynn Erickson. And it is trying to do this, to give the ultimate interdisciplinary experience and to structure it in a way that actually the last presentation talked about. What I noticed in the last presentation was a struggle. The students are not going deeper. Where do we actually see that they are applying the knowledge, that they're doing something with it? This is very hard, and this, I think, needs to be very strongly present in course design and teaching, and then eventually in what the students themselves do. So actually the previous presentation was basically the empirical approach to this problem, and now I'm going to present some of the theory and philosophy of that problem. We only have 15 minutes, so I'm actually not going very deep. I'm just going to give you a glimpse. If you're interested, then you can come find me. You can read my report, the TDG report. I will be in Hong Kong for at least 4 years, so nothing to worry about too much. Please go to the first page of the handout. It says page 6 on it. It's page 6 from my original report. So the top, the description of 4 levels of conceptual engagement. This is, I think, the most important innovation of my work. This is what conceptual interdisciplinary course design is about. You pick one big concept, and then you organize all these perspectives around it, and then by studying one concept from multiple perspectives, you train this. You train this in people that they're making this movement from knowledge to topic to conceptual to interdisciplinary, and then back again, and then back again. And this is a conceptual movement where you make steps that help you do knowledge transfer, that help you apply, that help you get these new perspectives. So on the table you will see the 4 levels. The knowledge level has to do with sources. These do not necessarily have to be from one discipline, they can be from multiple disciplines. But they all contribute to one topic. Then the topic has to be related somehow to the concept. When you do this, you get a new definition of the concept. So we had beauty before. They're doing it, although they are doing it almost exclusively with philosophy, literature, and poetry. But you can go much farther than that. I have some sources that I could give to this person about social psychology, about the beauty of mathematical formulas. You can go really far with this, and this is kind of the point. Then the step number 4, the interdisciplinary step, is when you end up with a lot of different definitions of one concept, and then you can find the situation where you can apply multiple of these concepts to one example, and that's when you're doing interdisciplinarity. The problem with interdisciplinarity is, again, the structure of it, how to do it in a structural way. And I think one of those ways is by focusing on concepts. I can give you, yes, let me see. What should I say next? Below the table on the first page, I gave some examples of activities in class that do this. Now you might think this does not seem very revolutionary, and you're absolutely right. Many of these things already happen in class. The big problem is, though, that most professors are experts, and most professors already understand because they have already done this for 10 and 20 years. So it's already in their head, but it needs to be very explicitly done during the class. I've read a lot of amazing course manuals that I thought, this sounds amazing, and I talked to students who also say, it sounded amazing, but then when I'm in the classroom, I have no idea what's going on. And it's very simple, so very simple mistakes, like in the end of the class not saying, today we talked about this, the reason we talked about this was because of this, and this fits into the larger course because of this. This is actually the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps that I just mentioned. So people are already, good teachers do this already to a large extent. Your last Teacher of the Year award was awarded to someone who has started to do this, and this is partly why he won Teacher of the Year. Mark McGinley, who was mentioned before, has already started doing this in his courses about ecosystems. So he picked ecosystem as the primary concept, and then he made a list of sub-concepts that all link back into the definition of ecosystem. So he's also been at least concept-based, and if you make more definitions from the perspective of other disciplines, you get interdisciplinary conceptual design. I don't want to get too much into it, but the last page, though, is an example. So during the TDG, I have been given complete freedom, which was risky, and Jim did it. He gave me that freedom, and this is what I came up with. There's a little bit more than this, but this is an example of what I meant. So here I filled out those levels of conceptual engagement. In level 1, I have a number of sources, and I summarized what the sources say with one sentence. Then it moves over to the topic. It moves over to the generalization. So what kind of lesson can you draw from those sources? And in number 3, you use those sources and that topic to define the concept of science. What is science according to these topics and the debate that comes forward from it? Now, you keep doing this, you keep getting different generalizations, and you keep getting different definitions of the concepts of science. On the other side is more details. It explains in more detail what the classes do. Please look at this later. We don't have time for this now, but it gives a more detailed example of what I mean. This attachment, these tables are the practical version of the first table, where I explain the theory. Now, during the development of this course design method and framework, I came into the problems of interdisciplinary teaching, and I had to think about, but wait, how do you actually do this? And that led me back up to what Jim was talking about what do you do as a liberal arts university? And there are 2 general conclusions that I would like to share that need to be used to when we are doing the design in the Common Core, in general education, and even your own courses just in disciplinary level. So the next page on the handout, page 17, has a little graph. And it's about interdisciplinarity, what it is. A very good way to think about interdisciplinarity is, what is the question that you are posing in your course? Many courses don't ask questions. They just say, I am this discipline, these things are important in this discipline, and this is what I'm going to teach you. This is necessary because people need basic fundamental knowledge, but it's not really asking questions. If you study or teach sociology and you just say, the question that we have is, what is society? Yeah, okay, maybe, for fundamentals. It's a bit of a boring question, and it's very abstract. But the way that interdisciplinary scholarship works, in at least this perspective, is where is your question? Where is it located? Many questions are claimed by disciplines. So they say, that question belongs to us. And the same goes for concepts. So they say, this concept belongs to us. We have authority over this concept. So when you want to do interdisciplinary scholarship, and therefore interdisciplinary teaching, you need to focus on these concepts that do not belong to one discipline. The graph gives an overview of 4 different ways. You have informed disciplinarity, which means you stay within your discipline, but you just sort of borrow a little bit from someone else. Then you have synthetic interdisciplinarity, which is where you're in between disciplines. I think an easy example is history of economics, something like that. Then you have transdisciplinarity. This is the idea of a concept or a research question that goes across multiple disciplines at the same time. My favorite example is urban studies, urban planning. You cannot say urban planning is a discipline. It doesn't really work because it is a collection. Climate change could be one. And the next one, the more complex one, and I have to admit that the distinction between trends and conceptual interdisciplinary is hard, but I think it's there, is a concept that exists entirely independent of any discipline. I think beauty qualifies. I also think that some of my examples that I've worked on qualify. These are concepts such as problems, work, authority, science, love and sexuality. Gender is another one that's often named in this example. Yes, gender studies exists, but gender studies again is something else than feminism, and they study the concept of gender. Yeah, this is a problem of history of science, right? At some point something becomes a discipline. So this is quite complex. But this is the idea, that you get something that allows you to tap into disciplines and draw it towards you. Now, the next thing about interdisciplinary teaching I want to mention is on the next page, we have a model of interdisciplinary research from Ellen Repko. And another page afterwards is another model. You can use both of them. They both have interesting ways of structuring it. When I was doing the course design, I was thinking, these people who do interdisciplinary research, can we do that in the classroom? Because this is what we want people to do. We want people to go through these steps of finding information, developing questions, developing problem statements, synthesizing, and then moving forward in application. Now I want you to look at the last one. It says page 28. It is the Mencken and Keestra model. It has 8 steps. And it goes from identifying the problem to formulating the research question, developing theoretical frame, and so on and so on and so on. Ideally, of course, you want students to do all these steps. If they're doing something truly interdisciplinary, they do all of these steps. What happens in reality? In reality, the students do the last 2 steps, number 7 and 8, because we design the courses. So they already get the data. They get all the literature, they already get all the research question and theoretical frameworks. The only thing they do is to reevaluate and reinterpret our conclusions. Now, I'm not going to say we should just organize courses with no content and let students do that. Yes, theoretically, that would be the purely interdisciplinary experience. That's not what I'm saying. Instead, what I'm saying is the course design could become a bit more conscious of this. So making students more aware of why you picked certain sources and how they contribute to this larger discussion, which is what the levels of conceptual engagement table was about. Another problem that I've been a bit critical of in this university and elsewhere, I actually don't think you can do interdisciplinary teaching in the first year. I've seen your Making of Hong Kong course and I like it. I think it works in the sense of that you give different perspectives on a topic, but I am convinced that you do not get farther than multidisciplinarity. And when I say multidisciplinarity, that means you just show one idea, you show another idea, you have another idea, but they don't connect. They don't interact. And maybe, this is a question that we need to think about. Maybe this is just too much to expect from first-year students. So, that is a question for curriculum design of the Common Core, of your own maybe disciplinary courses later in your bachelor as well. How to do that, because you need those basics first. So originally, Jim said, I want you to design one of these courses for the core curriculum, but I want it to be in the first years. And I've challenged Jim and said, I can do that, but it will look completely different and it will not be truly interdisciplinary. Let me see if there's anything else. I have significantly deviated from my program, but I think it's okay. So, opportunities. Well, I'm hoping people are interested in this. I don't expect you to feel like you completely get it. Please look at the document later again. I think it'll be a little bit more self-explanatory. I was hoping people would be interested in looking into designing courses using this framework. Then I'm interested in participating in the discussion what it means for a university to be interdisciplinary. I do not think that there are clear definitions of this right now in policy making and in larger statements of curriculum design. There needs to be a clear idea. What is interdisciplinarity and how are we going to achieve that realistically? Most of it is PR and just sounding like you're doing it and putting it on the website. But there needs to be a more clear definition of this. I am doing a PhD in comparative education. I will be comparing the four-year curriculums across Hong Kong from different universities, and this is one of the things I'll be looking at. So how have the different universities interpreted interdisciplinarity, and what does that mean? So a very simple example, PolyU, when they talk about interdisciplinarity, is more applied. So when they do a design study, they say we want people to also know about production processes, supply lines, how the financing works. Even if you're studying how to design a dress, we still want you to know that. That's their idea of interdisciplinarity, which is quite different from some of the more lofty citizenship kind of ideals that other people have. I wanted to mention some factors for success of the project and issues. One of the largest issues is grading schemas. When you do something as complex as this, how do you grade it? I didn't really put much attention to it because I just didn't want it to distract me from the experiment. This is very hard, and this needs to be thought about. If you do interdisciplinary studies, you need interdisciplinary grading schemas, and also need to think about learning outcomes. How do you formulate them, that they are convincing and effective? I was suffering from library quotas, and I got Carol in trouble because I didn't return books on time. The difficulty of getting teachers and students to do it, when I was doing it, when I was designing this course, this experimental course, it is very, very intense. Because if you're within a discipline, you can just follow what a lot of other people are doing and then find your niche and go for that. It was intellectually incredibly exhausting. It was very rewarding, but after 6 or 7 weeks, I had a bit of a mental breakdown because you keep synthesizing, you keep experimenting with new ideas. So it's fun, but it's really hard. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And I can imagine that if you are a senior expert in your field, you will feel like a student again when you do this, and some people will not like that. Another thing is Hong Kong has this epic library system that is not very common elsewhere in the world. This is perfect for interdisciplinary studies and efforts. The fact that I have easy access to all the libraries here in Hong Kong has been very, very helpful and very important. And this requires a certain degree of freedom, risk, and creativity that Jim has given me, but that you need to convince other people that this is worth it and that this is also quite hard. Now let me very quickly see if I missed anything important. I don't think specifically. I think, yeah, we're ready. Again, the report itself, I only gave you 3, but I fully developed 6 classes as examples. So let me, do I have like 2 minutes more? Is that allowed? Please go back to the example. So this course is a course about science. Every class, S1 is a class, S2 is a class, S3 is a class. Every class has the primary concept, which is science. So we're going to learn something about science in every class. Then it has a secondary concept, a sub-concept, which is the one that has the line under it. Non-science, actual age, and religion and magic, which means this is the secondary concept being applied to the primary concept to make sense of it. Then there's the topic. It says demarcation in philosophy of science, world history, and philosophical preconditions of scientific development, and explanation, prediction, and control. That is the topic. Then there's a list of questions below it, and I've subdivided these questions into knowledge question, conceptual question, and provocative question. The knowledge questions are the level 1 of the conceptual engagement table. They are the sources. So you ask, how do you demarcate science? You ask, what is the actual age? The sort of primary questions. Then the conceptual question is a question that functions on a higher level where you're already at the generalization stage. You're generalizing the sources and the information to draw certain conclusions about the primary concept that you're studying. Then the provocative question is the interdisciplinary question. this in class number 2, the provocative question is it possible for China to do true science, or are they culturally handicapped? Is it impossible for China to do science because they have an inferior culture? That's a provocative question. You can formulate an answer to this question using your definition of the concept of science, which is underpinned by a generalization that you made from the sources that you studied. Now again, I want to emphasize, this is the movement. The content doesn't matter. I don't care about the content. The point is that you make this movement very clear. And if you do that, I think you can achieve interdisciplinary education and teaching. So that was it. I'll be here the rest of the day in Lingnan, so if you would like to have a cup of coffee, we can do that. And look forward to talking more about it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to draw this to a close. One thing that I think is you know, obvious to me is that these have been quality initiatives brought about through the availability of these teaching development grants. And I can see that, you know, there's much scope for development in these things, and I am gratified that we're now turning these into publications. Now, obviously, you know, some of these things are quite complex. I mean, Florian's concept-based, you know, design is a complex concept. But, however, if you can get to grips with it, one of the things you can do is to turn it into a publication. It's obviously ripe for a publication given the sort of degree of novelty and degree of sort of intellectual effort that goes into producing something of this nature. This is where we get recognition. It's a little bit like service learning, you know, on all these things. How do we recognize these things? And I think that this is where the publications are important, but I think you know, there's no doubt about it that we have to recognize the effort that goes into TDGs. It is at least recognized in terms of the Teaching Excellence Award these days. Anyway, that's enough. We've now gone 10 minutes over, so I just thank you all for coming. Again, if you need to talk to people about it, Florian is here. You've got everybody's contact, you know who they are, and you can talk more about their particular initiative. So I'd like to thank all the presenters. Thank you very much.